The Nevada desert didn't forgive easily. By mid-afternoon, the sun turned the sand into a sea of fire, painting everything in harsh, blinding shades of orange and red. Even the wind, dry and unforgiving, moved like heat rising off a stove. Two German shepherds crested a low ridge, their paws pressing into the sun-bleached rock, the terrain stretching endlessly before them. Axel, the elder of the two, moved with deliberate caution. His fur was worn, his muzzle marked with deep scars, and one ear was torn at the tip, a permanent reminder of a fight no one had witnessed. The younger dog, Ranger, by at least 5 years, darted ahead, full of untamed energy, his ears flicking at every sound the desert made. They weren't searching for prey or food. Their noses had caught a different scent. Something human. What they found wasn't water. It wasn't anything they could easily understand. It was a girl. She hung limp, tied to a thorny shrub just tall enough to keep her upright. Her skin was sunburned raw, a bright red that stood out against the pale desert, and her dusty pink shirt clung to her ribs, heavy with sweat. The thick nylon rope that bound her wrists had cut deep into her skin, the fibers dark with dried blood. Her lips were cracked, her eyelids swollen, and she didn't move at all. Axel froze beside Ranger, his instincts honed by years of training kicking in. Ranger let out a low whine, stepping forward cautiously, his ears low. He sniffed the air, his body tense. Axel, more cautious, moved forward. The old police dog's muscles remembered movements that hadn't been used in years. He sniffed the girl's hand, nudging it gently. She didn't flinch, didn't react at all, until her fingers twitched slightly, a faint tremor, a pulse of life. Then, barely, her eyelids lifted, revealing two glassy blue eyes that met Axel's steady gaze. Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear but from recognition. "You're not a coyote," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're good." Axel stood over her, unwavering. For the first time in 3 years, the old dog remembered what it meant to protect someone again. Axel hadn't always been a ghost wandering the desert. 3 years ago, he was the pride of the Clark County Sheriff's K-9 unit, paired with Deputy Mark Callahan. Axel had tracked fugitives through snowstorms, sniffed out missing hikers buried under landslides, and once had even found a kidnapped child locked in an abandoned trailer, miles from civilization. Callahan had raised him from a pup, his only partner since he lost his wife. Then came the flood. A flash storm over the Arizona border turned a canyon trail into a wild, raging torrent. Axel and Callahan had been separated while rescuing a stranded family. Axel was swept downstream, carried away by the flood. For days, they searched for him. Weeks passed. Eventually, they sent back the tags. Insurance was filed, and Axel was presumed dead. But Axel had survived. In the aftermath, he learned how to read the wind, how to follow the shadows for shade, how to find water when even the birds had flown south. He became less of a police dog and more of a desert wolf, adapting to the harsh world he now roamed. And then there was Ranger. Ranger had no badge, no handler, no formal training. He had scars on his back and fear in his eyes, the kind of fear that comes from being alone. The first day he'd stumbled upon Axel, drinking from a roadside culvert 6 months earlier, Axel hadn't chased him off. Instead, Ranger had stayed. They didn't share stories, dogs didn't do that, but survival? That was a language both of them spoke fluently. Now standing together over a broken child under the brutal Nevada sun, Axel and Ranger seemed to understand something unspoken between them. There was no hesitation, no doubt, only the certainty that they would protect this fragile life no matter what. Understand, this wasn't a coyote kill, this wasn't scavenging, this was a mission and missions. Axel once knew always came with a purpose. Her name was Emily. Carter and she had been missing for 3 days of 7 years old. She had asthma, a curious mind, and a tiny Telescope in her bedroom window aimed toward stars she could barely name she loved caterpillars collected. Bottle caps endants told her mom she wanted to be an explorer of forgotten places, but she hadn't meant. This Emily had vanished from a family campsite at Lake Mee on a Sunday afternoon. Her parents, Dana and Eric, were folding blankets and packing coolers less than 50 feet away. One moment she was showing her mom a lizard she'd caught in a jar. The next she was gonna there had been no scream, no struggle, just silent. Sheriff's deputies had searched for her and shifts helicopter scummed the area. Posters went up in gas stations and roadside diners, but in Thiezer, time is the enemy. Each hour under sun strips away strength, hope, and breath. And now there she was tied up, abandoned, fading. Axel sniffed again along her legs, his mind working like it had years ago. The girl's breath came in soft rattles, shallow, strained. He could hear the whistle in her chest. The asthmash wouldn't last another day out. Haranger pawed at the ground near, restless, as if sensing the organ sinether could name aloud. Emily opened at her eyes again, barely. Her lips cracked as she tried to speak. A single word escaped. Help. It was enough. Axel lowered his head beside hers and let out a rumbling sound, not quite a growl, not quite a whine, a promise he wouldn't leave her. Not now, not ever. Axel circled the child slowly. The rope was thick, weathered nylon, looped tight around her small wrists and anchored to the spiny base of a desert shrub. Whoever had teed it knew what they were doing. The knots were deliberate, tight, and cruel. He sniffed the bonds, then leaned in and tested one with his teeth. It didn't budge. His jaw acted with the first bidion of his canines long ago fractured. Inth line of duty sent a flash of pain up his skull. Still he pressed forward, biting, grinding, working one thread loose at a time beside him. Emily let out a faint, rattling breath. Her lips were cracked. A thin wheeze came from her chest with every inhale. A dry, gasping whistle. Thad told him everything he needed. Talk. No, she was dehydrated, and worse, she was losing the fight to breathe. Ranger Until, now standing guard nearby, suddenly littered it away, nose down, tail stiff. Kasingasen on the wind. Axel didn't move. He stayed close, nose brushing against the girl's cheek as if to say, "You're not alone." Emily stirred, her eyes fluttered, barely open. "So thirsty," she rasped. "Me throat hurts." That word thirsty triggered something. Commands, training, buried instincts, water search. 5 minutes later, Ranger returned. His muzzle was damp and in his mouth he held a paddle of prickly pear cactus torn fresh from the desert. He laid it gently near Emily's side, then used his paw to tear it open. Emily blinked, then noticed her left wrist was free. The rope loosened while she'd faded in and out of consciousness. Now hung in slack coils with shaking fingers. She reached out, scooped some cactus pulp and brought it over her mouth. It was bitter, but it was what she swallowed and sighed. Axel returned to the rope without hesitation. The mission wasn't over, miles away. From heat rippled horizon, a motel room flickered under a dying fluorescent light. Laura Bennett stood motionless at the edge of a stained mattress, phone trembling in her hand. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "We have to go back. Travis is a child. We left her." Travis Dean cut her off, his voice sharp and laced with venom. "You want to go back? You want to walk into a search grid, crawling with cops and helicopters? Be my guest." Laura sank onto the bed, her hands shaking. She hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. The image of Emily Carter's face haunted every blink. A week ago, she was a beloved first-grade teacher. Parents trusted her children uttered. Her Emily had once drawn her a picture of a rocket ship with both of them flying to the moon. Now she was an accomplice to something unspeakable. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. She whispered. Travis paced, Therum paranoia fueling his every move. Theransom drop had failed. Police had shown up early. They panicked, and in the chaos Travis made the call, "Take Emily deep into federal land, tie her up and leave her." "She was slowing us down," he said coldly. "Besides, no one would look for her there." Lavra turned away from him. She couldn't bear to see his face. But she didn't leave, didn't call for help, didn't untie the little girl, and fat deep down might haunt her longer than the desert ever could. The desert was falling silent again at the edge of a restricted zone 20 miles beyond any paved road. Deputy Mark Callahan stood atop a rusted patrol truck, squinting Beneath brim of his hat, 60 years old, skinted. By sun and decades of disappointment, he'd been in law enforcement longer than some of his deputies had been alive. But this case, Emily Carter had cracked something he'd seen hundreds of disappearances resolved in hours. Others never but there was something about this one that wouldn't let him rest the look in the father's eyes. The half-packed tent at campsite, the gap-toothed smile, and Emily's school photo that reminded him too much of his own granddaughter. Cullinan unfolded a satellite map on the hood of his trucklets. Shift the grid, he told the nearest deputy. Push north into the red zone, Sheriff, the man said cautiously. We don't have jurisdiction out there, and there's no clear reason why they'd bring the girl into that zone. Callahan's jaw tightened. Exactly why they'd take her there. You don't hide something where people are looking, you hide it where they won't. He didn't tell them about the dream, didn't mention the night before and he'd woken in. A sweat, heart-pounding. Sure he had heard barking, not a wild dog, not a coyote. Axel, his old partner, gone 3 years, presumed dead, but feeling wouldn't shake that somewhere out in this vast merciless land. Axel was moving through the heat and dust, nose to the wind towards something he hadn't forgotten. How to find Callahan touched the worn leather cane leash he still kept in his pocket. Meets all a man had left his gut, and his gut was screaming, go north now. By late afternoon, the desert's cruel silence began to shift. A whisper of wind carried new sounds, rotor blades, distant engines, Rashik search teams expanding the perimeter. But for Emily Carter, it might already be too late. Her breathing had turned shallow, erratic. Her skin, once flushed from heat, now looked gray beneath layers of dirt. The cactus moisture had bought her time, but not much. Her airway, narrowed by asthma and dust, made every breath sound like a plea. Axel stayed by her side. He had chewed through the rope on her left wrist. The right was tougher, double knotted and dirried stiff by sun. Still he worked one fiber at a time. Ranger returned with another piece of cactus he laid itchingly beside. Emily then circled Nearbeer's twitching nose in the air. With one last snap, Axel bit through the fennel threads of Emily's right wrist. She was free but weak. Her arms dropped to her sides like dead weight. She didn't speak, just blinked slowly, her lips pale and cracked. Axel nudged her gently, and Ranger gave a low whine, urgent, protective. With small stumbling steps they guided Emily across the sand into a shaded hollow between the rocks. It wasn't much, but it gave her covert protection from heat, from eyes, from whatever was coming next. Axel pressed himself near the entrance, watching the horizon. Emily curled into the stone and dust, chest rising in shallow rhythm. Thin footsteps, voices getting closer. Axel stiffened above them. Travis Dean appeared first over the ridge, rifle slung in one hand, jaw clenched with frustration. Lavra Bennett followed, Ben looking pale and uncertain. Travis crouched low, spotting the broken rope and tracks. She's not dead, he growled. Laura's voice shook. We can still leave, Travis. Maybe someone found her. Maybe it's over. Travis snapped. She saw orifices. Lavra, you want to risk prison because you feel guilty. He scanned at her, and she couldn't have gotten far. That's when Ranger made his move. The Andrew Shepherd bolted from behind a cluster of rocks, barking furious, licking up clouds of sand as he darted across open ground. There's the mud, Travis shouted. She's nearby. He's leading us to her. Fueled by panic, Travis gave chase, rifle in hand, crashing down the slope. Laura stayed behind, frozen. She didn't move, didn't speak, didn't stop him. Ranger zigzagged ahead, staying just visible, drawing Travis away from the shelter. Axel waited, breath shallow, until Travis passed the rocks. Then he moved, launched like a missile, low, fast, silent. Travis turned just in time to raise Theraful. A shot cracked through the air. Axel grunted. Mitter struck in Thesholder, but he didn't stop. 80 pounds off muscle and memory slammed into Travis, knocking him to the ground. The gun flew. Travis screamed. Axel sank his teeth into his forearm and held until Travis stopped fighting. Ranger limped back, bloodied and breathing hard, and lay beside Axel. The sun dipped lower times load. They waited, insolent, somewhere far off, low, where off-roaders touched the wind for the first time in days. The desert was listening. Deputy Mark Callahan adjusted the brim of his hat as he scanned the desert through his binoculars. The sun was sinking Fast bleeding orange across the jagged rock search teams were pulling back for the night. Helicopters buzzed lower, radios quieted, but Callahan stayed. Something was still pulling at him, so much deep in his bones he reached into his pocket fingers. Brushing the worn leather leash he always carried, Axel's leash he hadn't let go. Suddenly, his radio crackled to life. "Sheriff, we've got movement in Sector 14. Faint heat signatures, maybe animals, maybe not." Callahan turned. Sector 14 was dead center in the zone he'd pushed. Toinclude, despite protests from the team, too far, too remote. They'd said Booth's gut had screamed otherwise. He jumped into his truck and gunned it down the dirt trail. Tire skimming loose gravel, the steering wheel shaking under his hands in the canyon. Axel stood over Travis's unconscious body, chest heaving, blood soaking. His fur ranger was lying beside Emily, who had curled into herself in the rock shelter, barely breathing, but alive. Axel limped toward her, his left front leg dragging slightly now, and nuzzled her cheek gently. She blinked, whimpered, but her hand reached for his fur. She was still fair. He turned his gaze toward Farage line. Something was coming, then voices, flashlights, boots on rock. "Hold up, we've got a body dog, 2 dogs wait. That's the girl, that's Emily Carter." And then Callahan's voice, steadier, "Thanel, the rest." Axel, the old shepherd, turned his head toward the familiar sound. His ears twitched, his tail lifted just slightly. Callahan froze for a moment. All the desert noise vanished. He took a step forward. "Axel, is that real Leo?" Axel didn't move at first. Then with a grunt he staggered toward him. Callahan dropped to his knees. He reached out and Axel pressed his forehead into the deputy's chest like he used to do years ago. In training and trust and silent pride. Callahan swallowed hard. "You stubborn, loyal son of a gun, you brought her back." He looked at Emily, now gently lifted into a medic's arms, and then at Ranger, who thumped his tail weakly. 2 dogs. One miracle in a world that often forgets what loyalty looks like. Theedzert remembered. Weeks past, the headlines faded, the manhunt ended, but what remained was memory and purpose. A quiet ranch miles from the noise. Life settled into something softer. The late afternoon sun dipped low over Sheriff Callahan's ranch, casting long shadows across the pasture whereat while old shepherds lay in the grass. Axel and Ranger side by side, tails twitching gently in the breeze. The gate creaked open. Emily Carter stepped through, a little taller, now a lot stronger. Her cheeks were full of color again. Her hair had grown back. She carried a small tin box in both hands. "Hi, boys." She smiled. "I brought you something." She knelt down, opened the tin, and revealed hummed dog treats shaped like stars and bones, still warm from the oven. Ranger perked up, first nosing her palm. Axel lifted his head, slowly sniffed, then rested his chin in her lap. Callahan watched from the porch arms, crossed acquiescent smile on his weathered face. After everything, Emily's family had moved to a town just 15 minutes away, close enough for visits, far enough to heal. They'd built something new, the Emily Carter Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to helping law enforcement locate missing children. The logo bore the silhouette of a German shepherd at full sprint. Emily stayed a while, scratching ears and whispering to the dogs like they were old friends, which of course they were. As he stood to leave, she looked back at Axel, his silver fur glowing in the sun. "He didn't leave me behind," she said softly, brushing Axel's fur. "One last Timino, I get to help bring the others home, just like you brought